Welcome to Authentic English Podcast, your weekly show where education meets recreation. Here's your host with 20 years plus of teaching experience, Marcia Pike.
Hey there, Marcia Pike here. Welcome back to another Authentic English Podcast episode. Today's show is going to be a continuation of last week's show. If you still haven't listened to episode 2, go back and listen to it right now, okay? As I've told you, there are 2 prevalent grammar points throughout episode 2. I've already let you in on one of them, phrasal verbs, which we'll discuss in today's episode. Have you figured out what the other one is? Let's go back to the basics. What is a phrasal verb? Why is it important? What types of phrasal verbs are there? A phrasal verb consists of a verb and 1 or 2 particles. It could be a verb and an adverb, switch off, such as switch off the lights. A verb and a preposition, look after, which means to take care of. Or a verb, an adverb, and a preposition, put up with, which means to tolerate. Phrasal verbs are important because they're so common in everyday spoken and informal English. So learning how to use them properly will help you sound more fluent. If you're unfamiliar with them, you might have difficulty understanding informal language because their meanings are typically different from the original verb and not as obvious if you analyze the words separately. The bad news is that you just have to memorize phrasal verbs and their meanings. To make matters even worse, the same phrasal verb can mean different things, and you just have to understand them through the context. Let's take the phrasal verb take off, for example. Take off has multiple meanings. Let's go over some examples. The plane will take off in 5 minutes. When a plane takes off, it begins to fly. Please take off your shoes. In this sentence, take off means to remove. Her career took off after her Oscar nomination. The phrasal verb take off in this context means to suddenly become successful. Alan took some time off work. In this context, take off means not to go to work for a short period of time. The man took off when he saw the police car. Here, take off means to leave a place, especially in a hurry. Okay, so we've gone over what a phrasal verb is and its importance. Now let's go over the types of phrasal verbs. Let me give you 2 examples before we get down to the nitty-gritty, okay? They usually eat out. I will pick up my parents at the airport. Note that in example 1, they usually eat out, the idea of the phrasal verb eat out is complete. However, in example 2, I will pick up my parents at the airport, if you just say I will pick up, the idea is incomplete. It doesn't make any sense. Who will you pick up? Or what will you pick up? The phrasal verb pick up requires a direct object. In this example, the direct object is my parents. Okay, I gave you the examples first so you wouldn't freak out with the terminology. I know that many of you get freaked out with the terminology and grammar explanation, but keep on listening. Hang in there. In example 1, eat out is an intransitive phrasal verb. Let's analyze the word intransitive. In is a negative prefix. For example, the words active and inactive or not active. This means that intransitive phrasal verbs do not require a direct object. For example, they always eat out. Note that the phrasal verb eat out does not require a direct object. The idea is complete. The sentence makes sense without any further addition to the verb. Transitive phrasal verbs, on the other hand, require a direct object. In example 2, I will pick up my parents at the airport. Pick up is a transitive phrasal verb. Note that the idea of the phrasal verb is incomplete. It wouldn't make any sense to say, I will pick up. You need a direct object to make the idea complete. Who will you pick up? Or what will you pick up? In this sentence, the direct object is my parents. Okay, so let's recap. There are two types of phrasal verbs, transitive and intransitive. The idea in an intransitive phrasal verb is complete, whereas the idea in a transitive phrasal verb is not. So you need a direct object, who or what. That's basically it. Now let's dig into transitive phrasal verbs. Transitive phrasal verbs can be either separable or inseparable. The prefix in is negative, so inseparable phrasal verbs are phrasal verbs whose verb and particle cannot be separated. I've looked for my keys everywhere, but I just can't find them. Know that the phrasal verb is look for, and the direct object is my keys. The phrasal verb look for is inseparable, therefore you cannot separate the verb look and the particle for. It would be incorrect to say, I've looked my keys for everywhere. However, in separable phrasal verbs, the verb and the particle can be separated. For example, I will pick up my parents at the airport. Note that pick up is the phrasal verb and my parents is the direct object. You can say this sentence in 3 different ways. I will pick up my parents at the airport. The object, my parents, goes after the particle up. I will pick my parents up at the airport. The object, my parents, goes between the verb and the particle. I will pick them up at the airport. When substituting the object, my parents, by an object pronoun, me, you, him, her, it, us, you, and them, the object pronoun must go between the verb and the particle. Note that it would be incorrect to say, I will pick up them at the airport. Let's recap again. There are 2 types of phrasal verbs, transitive and intransitive. Transitive phrasal verbs require direct object to make the idea complete, while intransitive phrasal verbs do not. Transitive phrasal verbs can be broken down into 2 types, separable and inseparable. In inseparable phrasal verbs, the verb and the particle cannot be separated. Sounds pretty simple putting it that way, doesn't it? The bad news is that it's not. Sorry. The good news, though, is that if you need help, there are great free online dictionaries that can help you. There are amazing dictionaries, but one that I love, although I do love dictionaries and I check lots of them, I recommend Collins English Dictionary because it gives you the structure. I think it's very, very helpful for learners. It's free. I'll link it to the show notes below. I'll tell you a little bit about the structures in the following slides, okay? Okay, so let's study the phrasal verbs that I used in my podcasting and video podcasting journey and dive in. Let's get started with the phrasal verb I just used, dive in. The phrasal verb dive in means to start doing something suddenly and energetically, often without stopping to think. The structure is verb plus particle. Remember I told you about Collins English Dictionary? This is how you'll see it. When you see verb plus particle, you know it's an intransitive phrasal verb, therefore it does not need a direct object. I started last week's episode by saying, thank you so much for tuning in to another Authentic English Podcast episode. The phrasal verb tune in means to watch or listen to a particular television or radio program or station. The structure for this phrasal verb is verb plus particle. Therefore, it's an intransitive phrasal verb. I could have said, thank you so much for tuning in, and the idea would have been complete. Another structure for this phrasal verb is verb plus particle plus to. Like I said, thank you so much for tuning in to another Authentic English Podcast episode. I came up with the idea of having my own podcast one day when a student of mine texted me asking me for help. Come up with means to think of something such as an idea or a plan. This phrasal verb is transitive and inseparable. For example, if I just say I came up with, the idea is incomplete. So you need a noun. So this is why you see verb plus particle plus particle plus noun. So I came up with a project. I came up with a plan. And it's inseparable because you could not say I came up project with. That was in June last year, but it was only in September that the idea actually sank in. If an unpleasant or surprising fact or idea sinks in, you gradually start to believe it, understand it, or realize the effect it will have on you. The phrasal verb sink in is intransitive, which means that the idea is complete. My original plan was to have a podcast, but when I told my family, friends, and students about it, I found out that most of them hadn't even heard of podcasting before. The phrasal verb find out means to discover a fact or piece of information. There are several structures for this phrasal verb, so I'm going to focus on the one I used in episode 2, okay? The structure is verb plus particle plus that. I found out that my friend is getting married in October. Yay, congrats, Deb. The original plan, which was podcasting, ended up branching out into video podcasting as well. So video podcasting only came up later on. In this sentence, there are 3 phrasal verbs. Let's start with the first one, end up, which means to reach or come to a place, condition, or situation that was not planned or expected. The structure for this phrasal verb is verb plus particle plus verb in the ing form. The second phrasal verb in this sentence is branch out, which means to start to do something different from what you usually do, especially in your job. And the structure is verb plus particle plus preposition. The third and last phrasal verb in this sentence is come up, which means to happen, usually unexpectedly. The structure is verb plus particle, which means that it's an intransitive phrasal verb. The idea is complete. This phrasal verb is commonly used when people want to be private about themselves and their personal lives. Let me give you an example. Why didn't you come to the party? Oh, I'm sorry, something came up. I don't know. After that, I don't feel comfortable asking because the person is obviously very private. Or maybe I'm being just oversensitive. So next time that you want to be private, you can use that like, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to make it. Something came up. I hope you got a taste for phrasal verbs. I actually had much more planned, but I'm trying to keep each episode down to around 15 minutes, give or take. So I believe that I have around 18 other phrasal verbs that I was going to discuss, but then it would be way too long. So if you're interested, please email me, okay? Well, I hope I haven't scared you off with all that grammar explanation and structures. Speaking of the devil, have you figured out what the other grammar point in episode 2 is? I'll give you some hints. It's a verb tense, which is super, super challenging. We use it a lot to talk about experiences and to talk about everything that has happened from a certain point in time until now. I gave it away. You know it, right? That's right, the present perfect. If you want to go that extra mile and follow along with the transcripts, please email me at marcia@authenticenglishpodcast.com. On a final note, I want to give a shout out to Andressa Fagundes from Aracaju, Brazil. Andressa is the second winner of our Skype class giveaways. I'm going to have 2 more Skype class giveaways on Friday, January 19th and 26th. If you have already subscribed, no need to subscribe again. But if you haven't, just go to authenticenglishpodcast.com/giveaways to subscribe and be eligible for the free Skype class. I hope we can meet in these free Skype classes. Well, I hope you have a great week. Have a good one.
Great having you with us today. Keep on with Marcia on social media. Head over to AuthenticEnglishPodcast.com to practice what you've just learned. And subscribe, rate, and review. Take care.